Jim, welcome. Would you begin by just sharing the origin of where you come from? Who are you?
Well,
Who is Jim Jones?
that was an interesting question I got asked years ago about what's in your name that you draw strength from, and I realized that was a really interesting question at a church retreat, and I said, oh, Jim Jones, I think the strength I get from that is common man. I just really identify with, anyway, you asked about our family of origin, and the two parts of my family I had on my dad's side. My great-grandfather was Gomer Wells. He was a missionary to Australia, married an Australian woman. Her mom came back and had a stroke and died here in Lamoni at Saints Home, and so she was the only relative, my great-great-grandmother, buried at Rose Hill. But since then, in the last couple of years, my great-uncle and great-aunt have also been ported all the way from Oregon and Colorado to be buried here, which was a surprise, because none of those family come here. But then I realized, well, Parker and Marley decorate those graves. They probably get more attention here than anywhere. And he got to be next to his grandma. So anyway, but the Wells line is the Gomer Wells and all that. There's an Australian connection because my great-grandfather married an Australian, and so we have made connections with them, partly because of somebody coming to get a picture of the gravestone back in the 80s, and we connected with our Australian relatives and been there, and they've been here, and all of our relatives have been back and forth, and we've been on Zoom together for parties, and so it's we connected because of a headstone. That's my testimony about even if you have ashes, have a headstone. Anyway, that is the Wells line. My grandma was the only one that stayed with the church. I think all the other younger siblings didn't see the church as very positive because how hard it was for their mom as their dad was gallivanting around the church, doing missionary work, and the church didn't really do much to support the women behind the scenes. They just had a hard life. But my grandma carried the banner, and so and she did go to Graceland. They lived in the house that's on the corner of, I want to say College and State, but I think the name is different. 3rd Street or something. 3rd Street. It's the Shelton House. It used to be the Keegan House. My dad was born there. My great uncle was buried out here. He was born in that house. Bertha Greer, did the delivery, and that was probably back in the late 20s, and they were here for a while, and then left Lamoni. So I never really thought of Lamoni as being part of my heritage because, it wasn't something that I grew up with, but it was part there. I think Dad was born in Pisgah or near Council Bluffs, so that was, I think the Fields Jones and his family, I think, came from Council Bluffs area. That's on that side. On the mom's side, she was of Antile, and so those of you that knew of Vita and Drew Denton, Vita of Antile, some of those people, those are all cousins. They were in the Atherton crowd. They farmed in Atherton, and so Mom grew up there. So those are the two sides, Wells and Jones is a tough one to track back, but I think it's in the Council Bluffs area.
Okay. Would you talk a little bit about your journey, your personal journey of faith as you a child and then where you are now?
Well, as a child, I was fascinated with Bill Weaver's introduction to himself, because I too was a slow reader. I was not a good student. I was in elementary school. Teachers said horrid things about your future on the grade cards back then. Oh. Things I wouldn't say today. He won't amount to anything. Nobody was suggesting that I was going to go to college. And my mom, who saved absolutely everything, all those report cards, and she gave them, you know, she gave them to her for Christmas when my kids could look through them, and my kids go, "Dad, you were stupid." And Mom didn't miss their mom didn't miss a beat. She goes, "And look what he's done with that. How much more?" But my Iowa basic skills, I was below average in every category but one, and that was abstract reasoning, which doesn't serve any purpose in elementary school. The ability to see patterns and numbers and things. And so that turned out to be my superpower, but it didn't come into play until I hit algebra in the 9th grade. And then I was 4.0 in math from that point on. I wanted to be a math teacher. And all of a sudden I started seeing myself as gifted, and you know, the rising tide raises all boats. And so that was, and I was also an Eagle Scout. I came from a scouting family, so I got a lot through that. My dad was working class, so I kind of saw myself as working class, and I was the only one of my brothers. I did help my sister come to Graceland, so she did go to Graceland. But I was the college student that went. I did talk my one brother that's in a mental hospital. I talked him into going to college, and he probably did better than me in mechanical engineering. I went to an engineering school. I was in the first class of computer science students that University of Missouri Rolla had. They had computer science, but they didn't have a computer science department. It was part of math. And so I went to a computer camp and fell in love with computers and decided that's what I wanted to do. Somebody said, "Be a computer scientist, you'll do the same thing and make more money." And I said, "Oh, okay." I knew I wanted to be a mathematician, but yeah, that sounds good. So and then I worked for the CIA, and as a co-op student. It was the only way I could afford college. I earned enough money to pay for 1 year of college. Got to the end of that year and I didn't know how to continue. And if I stopped, I knew, you know, Vietnam War was going on at the time, so I wouldn't have my student deferment. And somebody said, "Well, there's this program called the co-op program, and you can, it's an official government program. You couldn't do it yourself. You couldn't just say, oh, every other semester I'll leave college and work and then pay for it." But this was an official program, and you could apply, and you kept going back and forth every other semester to the same company. And in my case, it was CIA. And there weren't anybody looking for computer scientists. People didn't know what to do with computer science. So CIA, Ford Motor Company, and Phillips Petroleum were the only three companies that were even venturing to look, and Ford was laying off at the time, so I said, "Oh geez, I got to fill out these 20 pages of forms and where I've lived over the past 20 years and have 25 different references," and it was grueling. I hated it. But I said, that's what I do. So I ended up co-oping for the CIA, and that brought me to Washington D.C. I started off as a computer person, but I came to a point where I felt like I wasn't doing what I had promised God I was going to do. I was going to teach. I wanted to help young people, but I actually did. I just didn't think of it in those terms. I ended up being a youth leader. I was actually a pretty popular youth leader. I was single, so I was able to put all of my time. The amount of time I put in Rose Hill Cemetery is how much time I put in the youth work. Back then. I mean, the job ended at the CIA at 5, everybody was gone, and I just stayed there till midnight and used the phone and actually used the computers to put together databases of my youth and use the Xerox machine to create newsletters for the youth, and I used my own money to do mailings and stuff, and Lee Abramson had helped me kind of put together a camping program. He suggested I do that, and I said, oh well. So we started to build a camping program that went from just one camp. We found a Catholic campgrounds that would rent to us, and I got that built up till the year I left Washington D.C. area. Langley was we had 4 camps. We had a junior camp, senior high camp, a family camp, and were doing a caravan, you know, to Palmyra and Kirtland and other places. Palmyra being Mormon, of course, and so we were used to, you know, hitting all the Mormon sites as well.
Now, how many years were you in CIA?
I was 12 years there, and now that includes my alternate college years. But by the time you finish I graduated in '74, and one of my colleagues there was Larry Fairchild, and Larry found out that I was taking we worked on some projects together and side by side, and we'd actually been in a class together. CIA had its own internal training courses, and I got to know him there, and he found out I was going to Independence in April for my vacation. And he just goes, huh, who does that? So he comes in and goes, hi, I understand you're going to Independence next week. And I'm going, yeah, what? That was a strange way to start a conversation. He goes, I was thinking of going to World Conference myself. And I'm going, who are you? And he just laughed. He goes, well, I went to Graceland. And so we both graduated the same year, but I was at Rolla and he was at Graceland. So we became friends. But at some point I felt the need to try to, I was looking for something more people-oriented at CIA. And so I joined the training staff, and I trained people at CIA and became kind of the guru in a couple of areas to teach other programmers. And then later, I was still feeling the pressure that I needed. I talked with Wayne Updike, he was there at the time, and I said, I'm thinking about going to work for the church. And Wayne goes, you sure? He says, you know, look how much you're doing right now. Even though it's a hobby, you're doing this amazing work, and once you work for the church, it's going to be all shut down. They're going to tell you what to do and what you can't do, and he says, you know, you're doing amazing things here. And so he kind of talked me out of even thinking of those, of the whole idea, because he said, look, it's a bureaucracy there. And so then I ended up taking a job in the CIA because I saw an opportunity to go into personnel and be a recruiter. And I thought, ooh, that's people-oriented. And so I signed on, prayed about it, and every time I prayed about things, I never got answers. God spoke to me in a lot of humorous ways that had to do with trivial stuff. But the big stuff, he never gave me an answer. And my experiences in my life was always, you make your decision and the Lord will show you how he's been with you all along. You know, and it always comes later. So I was single, so they were excited about the fact that they could send me anywhere. They sent me to the one place nobody wanted to be, Chicago, and I was worried about it because I was leaving the entire youth thing I built up behind, and I had everything set up. There wasn't a successor for me. And the week before I left, people were saying, "Oh, this will all fall apart when you leave." And I said, "No, it's we got this amazing thing. It's all set up." And the week before I left, the Catholic Church called me and said, "You're not going to be able to have a campground this year." And so all 4 of the camps got canceled. And I'm just going, I felt horrid about it. But when I went to Chicago, I got involved in youth work there, became a camp director, campfire leader there like I had before, and of course that's where I met Pat. So and then you kind of go, oh, this was awesome. And like her, well, anyway. Got your next question?
That is my next question, but continue just your life journey then. Where else you worked? I mean, I know you got to Graceland at some point.
Well, that's really related to Pat's story. story, so I'll have to talk about that there. But I did go on after I got to Graceland, and while I was in Chicago as a recruiter, I had some interesting CIA experiences there. I got, if you've ever catch me in the corner sometime and ask me about the Argo movie, because I spent time with the two principals that John Goodman and Ben Affleck play. I got to spend a day with them on a recruitment trip, and so I got to see them telling graduate students the whole story. And I went back and said to Tony Mendez, the Affleck here, he says, "Why? How can you tell them all those things? That's got to be top secret." And he goes, "Well, if you don't tell people what we do, they're not going to want to work for us." So I became an open book at that time. And later I had the opportunity to go back to CIA, and Pat said, she was looking at other options. She said, "I really don't want to go city. I want to do more of a rural practice." And I said, "Okay, well, we won't go back." And I thought, "Oh, that's great. I won't have to take the polygraph." And they and watch the needle say, "Have you shared secret information?" And then we go, "Oh, but Tony Mendez did it." So it was just like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I don't have to," because every 5 years you had to be polygraphed again. and I was a nervous guy, so I was always. They always had to ask why the needle is going, and they had to try to get a baseline.
What are you saying?
They said, "Okay, well, tell us what's in your head." "Well, blah, 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 blah." "Yeah, we're not worried about that." "Okay, is there anything else?" So anyway, but anyway, I decided, the personnel was really excited about getting me because I was not the kind of person they were looking for, and they realized that maybe I could help recruit engineers and scientists and computer scientists, and I could teach them how to do that. They said, "We can teach you all the stuff you don't know." So they were really excited about me. And I have an interesting parallel story about Larry Fairchild. He was doing the same thing in his career, where he was jumping off. And so I always kind of saw Larry and I as, if I coulda, shoulda, woulda, I always go, "Well, now if I was there," because we were both doing similar things with our careers. We were jumping out some totally different thing, and then coming back, and then you look more valuable because you had been moving around within the agency. And so, but I had decided that I had given up on computer work too soon, that I was really good at it, and personnel was the bureaucratic part of the CIA. I went from, people that were around me that wore sandals and had ponytails and looked like hippies at the CIA, and people go, "Well, how do you work there?" Well, those people, you don't tell them how to dress because they're keeping your computer systems working. And then there's personnel, where everybody wore a three-piece suit and black tie, and everything, and had to shine their shoes, and that's where I was. So I went to DePaul University at night school and weekends and did my master's degree there while I was doing that. And in that process, we had Mark and.
But wait, now I am going to back you up.
Okay.
So when you're in Chicago, you meet Pat.
Yeah.
So how did you know this is the woman for me?
Well, there was a lot of things firing in my head. I was at church, and she was playing the organ. She really is a piano player, but back there they had the organ in First Chicago. She was the only person my age. I was the only person her age. So it was great. And people were kind of saying, "Hey, have you met Pat?" And the one thing I had experienced at the CIA, going from the Midwest to the East Coast, was I worked around professional women and professional blacks, like Larry Fairchild, and who was this Grayson grad. And my best supervisors were female, and I loved coming from the place I was in Lee Summit, Missouri, which there wasn't a minority in our school when I was there, and all the women, if they went to college, it was to meet somebody and then be a housewife. That was my mom's model, in fact. So I really wanted to marry a professional woman. I just said, and I used to say it like, someday I'm going to marry a GS-13. It was just something I said. I was a GS-9 when I said it, and I was a GS-13 by the time I came to Graceland. And then when I was introduced, he said, you should meet her. She's a doctor. And I went, oh, a doctor? God, that's better than a GS-13. So I said, yes, I have to meet her. And the thing that amazed me about her, well, there were so many things. One, we were about the same age. I mean, it was interesting. I dated a lot, but nothing ever got serious. And I was lonely. I really didn't know, when I left Washington, D.C., it was like girls came out of the woodwork to want to take me out before I left. And it was really just like, wow, up to that time, all of my contact with single females was as a youth director trying to get people to help at camps. And the people you tended to get were housewives and young adults, because the men just didn't have the vacation time. And so, and anyway, I was being invited out, and they were just these one date, and people probably wanted to see if they could continue to write to me, or I don't know what it was, but yeah, I was leaving, and they wanted to make sure they said something and said hi and wanted me to remember who they were. Anyway, when I met, and some of those people were younger than me, some were older than me. When I met Pat, she was my age, kind of, when we both graduated from 1969. So we both had gone through the whole Vietnam period together. We all both had, she had the stories that you may have heard about Kent State and how, and I was amazed at her stories about Ann Arbor. I just thought, I was struck with how brilliant she was. I mean, how she was an avid reader. I wasn't an avid reader. And she was, I don't know, she was just amazing. And I was kind of amazed that she wanted to be with me, or that she found me interesting, and I was, of course, I was pulling out all the CIA and every other kind of story I could pull out to be interesting. And we had a date where we spent, I think I preached that day, and then afterwards we went we spent the whole day and into the evening at walking around Chicago and talking. I probably did all the talking. And anyway, we got back to her apartment. Oh, and the other thing was interesting about it is, we went all the way to church up at First Chicago, but when we came home, we both lived on the same subway line. I was at the end in Oak Park, and she was at 2 stops earlier at Oak Park, and she was over by the hospital where she worked. So we're on the subway, and I get off at her stop, and walk her to her place, and we sit and visit, and then and I'm about to leave, and she gives me a hug, gives me a nice firm hug, and says, "You make me feel good about yourself. You make me feel good about myself when I feel good about myself when I'm around you."
Wow.
And that was a line that just really, bam. And I think that's probably when I knew it. But the other thing is I could see that she wasn't so independent that she didn't need me. I dated a lot of girls that were just very, professional and independent, and you didn't know what you fit in. Pat, I could tell she had some vulnerabilities. I couldn't believe that and the other thing that amazed me about the two of us is we both went through so many things together. There were times with the church, where I had run into things with people in priesthood that you went, wow, this guy's a jerk. I didn't think there would be jerks, and you know, and when you're you know, when you're young, you know, and you're reading the Book of Mormon and you're reading the Doctrine and Covenants, just everything is just so awesome. And then you're a youth leader, and then you step across somebody's turf and you have some pastor reading you the Riot Act because you did something to help the little kids not have to sleep out in a flood. And you used their basement or something. Or one case I brought Jerry Ashby back, and I was doing all my communication with the youth leaders. But the youth leaders didn't always talk to the pastor, and the pastor would be all upset because he didn't know. And we'd end up having to instead of having a Jerry Ashby coming in and visit with the kids at one case, we had to soothe some feathers by just having Jerry Ashby come, and he and me and the pastor would talk just to try to soothe it over down in Richmond. When I was a youth leader, I was district youth leader. I went all the way from Baltimore down to Richmond. So, because I was single, I went to different congregations, and I would try to drum up support so that kids would come to retreats and stuff like that. And she had those same things. So it was like our lives, we had parallel experiences. And I think that was, you know, when you grew up in the same time period, it was interesting that and of course I was enthralled by the fact that she was a convert, and I had many generations in it, so I was fascinated by that. I had read the Book of Mormon and fell in love with the church my second year at CIA, where we were in a study group and stuff, and that's another story. But anyway, with Pat, I felt like we were two people that understood each other. I also felt that I felt like I could be her cheerleader, and I could help remind her how amazing she was, because there were times that she would not think of herself that way. And so hand in glove, I kind of thought, you know, this was the person for me, and because I had somebody that needed me. I felt like this is an amazing person that actually needs me, and that was it.
And you got married what year?
Well, let's see. A couple months later, it was the first time I didn't go home. You know, for a holiday like Christmas, and I was just really excited about the fact that I wasn't going to go home because she was on call. I was going to take her out to dinner. It was Thanksgiving, and I thought, I'm not going to go home. Why would I go home? She's here, she's working, and you know, I could take her out after she gets off work, and I had this whole plan of asking her to marry me, and didn't work. I fumbled the words. I was going to do it at the restaurant, and it was goofy. All of a sudden I'm at the cash register, and she's already grabbed things, and she's there, and I was going to go back, and I thought, I'm not going to do it at the cash register. So I say, hey, do you want to see my office? So I took her up to the CIA office, and that's where I proposed. And
that was to add something here.
1979.
1979.
And then we were married Memorial Day
80.
The
So-
best password I have, he never knows it.
Yeah, well, it's
the day you were married.
yeah, it's probably the big day we were married. I do know it because I use it. I'm just glad that she didn't pick the day we first met or the day we got engaged. The problem with me was I always picked days that I could remember, but they were always days that change. You know, he would say, oh yeah, Valentine's Day, or well, you know, Thanksgiving changes, Easter changes. So, you know, you got to pick dates like the 4th of July if you want to. Anyway, so we got married, and then a year later we had Mark.
Okay, that's where you were. Continue from there. Okay, so you talked about going back, getting your computer science at DePaul,
Yep.
getting your master's degree, and then you had, well, like you said, so go.
Okay, well, so once I decided I wasn't going to go back to CIA, because Pat said she really wanted to do a rural kind of thing, rural medicine, because she grew up in a rural area. And she had actually decided she was going to continue to stay in Chicago, and so she ended up kind of working for. It was kind of interesting. She was really interested in some of the Roy Cheville's things that he had written, and there was there was a group there that was doing Holistic Health Center, holistic with a W. California is the holistic with an H, but there was this thing, and so she took a job doing that, which was low paying, but it was allowed her to stay in Chicago, and so she was a doctor as part of a team, and so she got to experience how that concept that she felt called to worked in practice, and it didn't quite work in practice the way there were still male-centric people that just wanted to dominate, and they weren't even the doctors, and so so there was still all those challenges. But we, when it came to the end of that and the end of my time, and I needed to make a decision about going back to DC, I went ahead and built up a lot of vacation time, so I kind of took some vacation time so that I could finish off my master's degree a little more before we moved to Lamoni. And the way we moved to Lamoni is I knew she'd come to Lamoni, and she didn't like it because she came and interviewed. Dr. Nelson had a thing, but it was very family centric and idiosyncratic, and they didn't even treat her very well. It was like, we haven't got time for you, but you're here to be interviewed. And so she said, look, I'd be swallowed up alive in Lamoni as a single. So I made some joke because I saw in the Herald that they were looking for computer science and a doctor. And I said, whoa, she wanted to be a rural practice. I said, oh, well, we could always go to Lamoni, thinking she'd say, yeah, that's out. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, they're looking for a doctor. Dr. Swanson was retiring, and one of the computer science faculty apparently. So I came, we both came, and I said, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. I really did not want to come back to the Midwest. I really didn't want to come back to the Midwest. I felt like I grew up on the East Coast, and I loved Chicago, but we didn't want to raise our son in Chicago, because you just read the newspaper and you said, do we really want his bike to be stolen at gunpoint by some other kid? So we were looking for, so I knew well, let's give it a chance, we'll go, and I guess maybe this is the way. I always said I wanted to be a math teacher, and maybe this will be what I need. So we came, we looked around for houses. We came a day early, looked at houses, and Bob Hendon took us around. And then Newell Yates, I think, was here, and we said, we got back to Chief Lamoni, and we said, let's decide, let's pray about it, and let's let the Lord let us know. We'll come and compare notes. So the next day I went for my interviews, she went for hers. And I was with Bruce Grable, and well, it turns out they had filled the computer science position. So there was no position for me. And so we came, and everything was just apologetic and negative, and there was just nothing. For me, and I thought, well, can't Grayson make something? I mean, how often do you have a computer science person with my credentials just come and drop into your lap? When you do something just to get pat, which they kind of did, but it wasn't in a satisfying way. Larry Sturgis called me and said, and he was almost, I felt like somebody told him he had to call me wanted to know if I wanted to be a part of the development. I said, no, absolutely not. I said, I'm not, Graceland's not my alma mater. I can't do that. No. And Larry was probably relieved, but I'm sure that somebody told him, you gotta call Jim Jones because we want that. Anyway, we came back to the hotel that night and it was one of those, okay, you go first. No, okay, yeah, no, you go first. So, well, Pat said, oh, my interviews went pretty well. And then, how about yours? Mine didn't go very well. And she goes, well, and she said, well, actually mine went spectacularly well. She goes, I just love these students. And because the students, she was all part of the whole, what was your group called?
Student Life.
Student Life. She was all part of, she was on the student life side, and I was on the sad sack science side. It was apologetic. We had no money. We had no grants. Graceland didn't pay us salaries. We couldn't get electron microscopes unless we could, we had the time to write grants. It was sad. And I went, this is not. So we're escalating, in our conversation. And finally it got to where she goes, I really think God is calling me here. And I said, I think God is telling me there's other places for you, Jim. And so we just got all the way, boom, 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 all the way up to high level. And then I said, okay, I've prided myself in being a guy that can marry a professional woman. Women have had to follow their men forever. I can follow her, it'll work out, something will happen. So, and I still had to actually take a test at DePaul to actually get the final master's. So, the first 6 months, the spring semester of 1983,
Yeah.
in 1983 we came, and so she was there for the spring semester. I was unemployed. But I had Mark, so I babysat Mark. I would hang out at the coffee shop, a different coffee shop than the one now, and every morning I'd be with the mayor and Chuck Church and the Shippy, Max Hammer and his wife and the dentist, Shipmans, and the Shipmans, and they loved having little Mark around and Mark, give him a penny to go buy some gum. And I fell in love with the town, and I realized I'm really glad I'm not working for Graceland. People that work for Graceland don't get that. It's a whole world, and they don't, So I had a chip on my shoulder already from Chicago, and I'm sitting with these amazing people that were investors that did things that I would never do. They were into futures and selling options and things like that. I'm going, oh my God, I've done some of that, but wow, and then you realize these farmers are people that are having children who became doctors and lawyers, and so it wasn't a bunch of country bumpkins. It was like, these people are amazing. And so, and then I ended up being on planning and zoning and stuff. And then at the end of that semester, I got my master's degree by then. Dennis Steele called me and said, hey, I'm leaving. Do you want my position? I said, oh, sure. I'd actually been interviewing and didn't see anything I was interested in. Everything was insurance oriented, database oriented, and I was hardcore computer science. So anyway, I said yes, and not realizing that Dennis Steele didn't have the right to give me the job. So I'm sure Bruce Grable, we're going, you did what? Oh, we're not going to talk to Jim about this. Yeah, we'll work it out. Well, obviously we're going to, but so I don't know what was happening behind the scenes, but I said, I'll take it.
Wow.
So that's how that happened.
So the GU experience, the Graceland experience, how did that fulfill what you wanted in terms of?
Well, yes and no. My favorite president, I think, was Barbara Higdon, and Bill Higdon was a close second because he was science. I still felt the frustration of not having much support for science, and it came to a head when it was clear to me that I was going to be all by myself in the computer science department, because one of my colleagues did get tenure, and I had been trying to get him tenure, and so we kind of worked together really well. He was the he was the bad cop, I was the good cop, but he was the cop that taught the people that probably got us the Ackerley scholarship. The people that the Ackerleys hired and said, "Oh my God," and they still go see that teacher whenever they're here. They always go up to Des Moines, spend time with him, because he was their favorite. Because they were international, they were Eastern European, and so they were used to tough cops, and they learned a lot under him. So, but anyway, so I left Graceland. Had an offer from Simpson and an offer from a company in Des Moines. I took the one in Des Moines because I didn't want to poke my finger in the eye with Graceland by going to Simpson, but Simpson really gave me, and I didn't want to burn bridges. So I talked very positive about, and I was actually very excited about this opportunity because I always wanted to work in hardcore, low-level computer science, and this was probably the first time that existed in Des Moines. It was a company that did internal firmware type programming inside of telecom switches, and I really just wanted to be a programmer, but you can't escape it. They won't let you, and so they would send me off to be the trainer, and I hated that because you didn't get any time to prepare. It was, "Jim, tomorrow you're going to Texas to talk to the Cisco engineers and teach them how to do this." And I go, "I don't understand any of that." "Oh yeah, you do." "No, I don't." and I was a wreck. I actually I had some situational anxiety dealt with that I had to talk to somebody about, and I would get panic attacks after I survived my first one. And the first one I survived famously because I was able to do things and they thought I could walk on water. And I'm convinced the Lord helped me in some of that. But that was during a really exciting time in the computer science industry. It was Y2K. I got to be there for the whole Y2K thing where everybody wanted you to prove that, and find all the problems. Then there was 9/11, and there was the dot-com bust. And there was 3 years. It was, I was pulling all-nighters just like I had here. I was working with young people from MIT, where I just learned a lot, and they learned a lot from me, and so it was really exciting. And so it was my opportunity to go from government to education to industry, and I really like it. And then the Ackerley money came, and they needed a PhD, and they were.
I don't know if they know about what Ackerley money means.
Well, Bob and Lee Ackerley gave $3 million, and eventually gave $4 million, or maybe it was $2 million. Eventually gave $3 million. But anyway, they gave money to the computer science department. It wasn't to Graceland, it was to the computer science department. Neither one of them were alumni. They were so impressed with how much they were making by hiring Graceland students from our program that they said we could give money to MIT or Princeton, and they wouldn't know $2 million. They wouldn't even say thanks. It was so little. But Graceland, they can make a difference. So, and they'd already given some money to something else when they hired these students who were from Macedonia students, and so anyway, there was this money. Steve Murdoch, Barbara Higdon called me in the middle of the night. Things were starting to fall apart where I worked, but I still wanted to make a go of it. And so she called and said, "Could we have you back?" I told her no. And I said, "No, I'm you'll find somebody." And then a couple weeks later, it was clear that Pat and I needed to move, and so she said, "Well, it'll take me a year to we were about to go on a trip to New York, and I was going to do some interviews out there, and then I realized this is crazy. She's just built this new building and she's done all these things here. Why am I doing this? So I called Steve Murdoch. And Steve goes, oh, no, yeah, it's still open. So they were about to do all these interviews with people that they could barely understand on the phone. And he said, no, you are our first choice. So Steve Murdoch is the guy that convinced me to come back. So I came back as the director. And those are actually my highlight years, to get to your question. My favorite years at Graceland, bar none, is working with the Ackerley Scholars. And even my kids would go, Dad, you think they're your kids? And we had some of them that would stay at our house, because they couldn't go home, and we'd let them stay in the summer or stay over break and things like that. So, but I ended up marrying one of them. There was one of my Chinese students got to go to Texas a few years ago and perform the ceremony. Yeah, well, officiating.
Yes, there we go.
Officiating.
Let's clear that up.
And so that was, and her parents, who had learned English so they could meet me, thinking that we would go to China someday, and we never did. We got to experience it.
Haven't yet.
Probably won't. There's only so many trips. And but anyway, and they cooked for us and kind of wanted to feed us, both sets of parents. So as part of that whole event, that was fun.
So how many years were you at Graceland altogether?
I want to say 30. We came in '83. I retired in 2014. I was gone for 3 years. And so it might have been 29. I forget. There was a point in which they started saying, "Oh, happy anniversary! It's your 1 year." When I came back, and I said, "You guys stop that." I said, "You better update it."
Yeah, no kidding.
This is not my first anniversary. So they kind of did start
I'm
talking.
certainly glad it all worked out. It's
Yeah.
been such a gift to Graceland.
Yep.
I want to acknowledge that. Would you talk a little bit about your spiritual journey, your baptism, and what's occurred since then in terms of your spiritual experiences?
Well, my baptism, I was 8, and so that was early on. I would say the big experience for me was in college. I was still in college, and I was in Washington, D.C., taking this, it was a group of students, young adults, that we had a Book of Mormon study. And I read the whole Book of Mormon, and it just got me. And so I felt like I joined the church then. I mean, it's kind of interesting, but you feel like that's your... And the interesting thing is, as part of my Boy Scouts, I actually had read between the covers of the Book of Mormon, the one for kids. And I thought, oh, I'd totally forgotten that. But, going through the real Book of Mormon and just, from beginning to end, that captivated me. And then my youth work, running camps, that was, a lot of the spiritual growth comes from going to camps, but when you're at camp. I think I was also in a program called Mikasay down in Kansas City, Boy Scouts, and you have to make resolutions, and one of my 4 Hearts resolutions was to serve the younger and the weaker. And of course I had a brother that's Down syndrome, so I would kind of conflate it with that. But there was a year that I didn't have enough money to go to 2 camps. I had to earn my money myself. And 1 year we didn't go to scout camp, so I went to church camp, and it became this junior high church camp, and I had this amazing experience. So the next year, I really wanted to do both camps, but I knew I could only do 1 camp, and I prayed about it a lot because I just didn't know. I said, Lord, should I go to church camp or scout camp? And my heart wanted to go to church camp, but my brain says you got to go to scout camp. This is the way to get your eagle. And scout camp, we play taps at night, and we all, bow down, and and it's beautiful and all that. So I said, Lord, I'm gonna go to scout camp. I guess that's, unless you tell me otherwise. A couple weeks later, my mom came to me and said, there was somebody at church that donated money so you could go to church camp. and it was like, oof, Lord didn't want me to choose, he wanted me to do both. And so, and then from that point on, I had enough money, I had a paper route and was able to pay for both camps. And somehow in one of those camps, when you come to Jesus at a campfire, I think you commit your life. I think I committed my life to the younger and the weaker, which was part of that whole thing at CIA. Like, what am I doing here? Am I really serving the younger and weaker? And then Wayne Updike said, absolutely you are. Yeah, but I'm not doing it my job. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. So those are, so that was a big one.
Okay, talk a little bit about what you're enjoying about retirement. I know you've done some
Travel,
amazing trips.
travel and being with Pat. I love being with Pat. We do Ragbri together. We've done trips together. We've been on adventures in Spain where we didn't speak the language, and we survived and thrived and had stories to tell. Where you're pulling into a town and it's getting dark and you don't know how to ask questions, and all the things that they say online are not true, like your hotel really doesn't speak English, even though it says they do. And so, and we worked really well together at that. We both have a style. I like to do everything to get ready, get all the train trips, get all the plane trips, get all the hotels, pay for the insurance, get everything done, and then I stop thinking about it. And she's still reading on all the places we're going to go and all the excursions and all that. So it drives her crazy because we're there, and I go, yeah, what are we doing today? And she goes, but that's kind of, she's my tour guide if we get there. Yeah.
Did you not go to Antarctica?
Yes, we did.
Would you tell us about that?
I think we're out of time for that. We'll have to do that another time. But yes, we did. And we had a great time there.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your Rose Hill involvement. How did you get so involved in that?
Well, I wanted to be, I had just done an overhaul of the Graceland Brick Plaza.
Okay.
And made it so that, because students had built it, but it really wasn't useful for the new things that Nancy Wallace was doing, where they could start buying a paver, and because the original brick plaza that the students built, who had long since graduated, and so that meant I had to manage it. They were selling bricks that were not even on the page. They were the corner bricks, and in the original days they thought, oh, those aren't bricks, and so I overhauled the whole thing and made it, and so then I thought I'd like to do that for the cemetery. I'm going to build a website for the cemetery, and that's why I got on. And then it took me years before I had time to really start doing it, and even now I'm not doing it the way I thought I would do it, because there are pictures already of most headstones on Find a Grave. So now what I've done is I've tied our website in so that it'll take you to their Find a Grave page, and that has. So I've accumulated tons of stuff. All Carl Green's old funeral logs that he had rescued out of the trash, and his family finally gave them to me after I asked a few times. I got Dave Moeller just recently came and gave me a box of stuff. He says, oh, I found this box. And I said, do you want it? Absolutely, I want it. And because I'm doing a lot of forensics, figuring things out. I've learned how mistakes got into the record back in the 80s, when people were using multiple sources to know who's buried where, and sometimes they're not buried there. and I'm learning out why. You know, maybe they got disinterred, maybe somebody. And so anyway, there's a lot of forensics. It's really kind of fascinating, actually.
Very fascinating. Well, we're going to take a few more minutes because we took it from the what words of wisdom would you like to share with this group?
Well, my word of wisdom is I think belief. I have never wavered in my belief that Christ is real or God is real. When I talk to myself, I'm fully aware that part of that is God. I could leave the church, and it wouldn't make a bit of difference whether God is with me. I mean, it just, you know, not that I would, but I'm just saying you know, the God within me is not something I could give up. My belief journey has changed. I was introduced to a concept by Chuck Skelton in Chicago and later Bob Mesley. Not that Bob would agree with the way I took his message, but I really bought into the whole process theology, and in which I see God now as not somebody that can move mountains, but that he is the most powerful, be all, in all, who has the most influence to make things happen. But he can't make some things happen unless enough people, you know, unless he can break through to all those conscious beings to make something happen. And so I'm a believer that God does absolutely everything in every moment, in every second, in every electron to bring goodness. And when goodness doesn't happen, it's because God couldn't. And it's because we didn't. And it feels like miracles, because when something finally gets through to that one person that sees somebody about to jump off a bridge, and they say, I think I should stop and talk to that person. It feels like, wow, this was the one person, and that's the one person that connected. But I believe God tried to get everybody that drove across that bridge to stop. And he only got the one person who might have had a brother or sister that died by suicide, and so they were more sensitive. And so it's not that God picks and chooses. It's our agency is what picks and chooses. And so I kind of, that's kind of my view of God, is that he's there. And so I guess my advice is just, my advice to people is Moroni's thing about planting the seed of faith. And he starts very basic. He says, you don't have to believe, you just have to want to believe. You know, if you just let yourself want it, that's good enough. Plant it. Let that be in your heart and be optimistic. And my experience in life is that if you believe, you start seeing. You know, if you believe in good things, you see good things. If you believe in the beauty of the world, you see the beauty of the world. If you see in the goodness of people, you see the goodness of people. And that begins to help you grow to where your faith grows, and you begin to experience God in a way. So belief is super huge. Faith is super huge. That would be my advice.
Thank you. Glad we got there. Our time has gone. I'm so glad that you and Pat chose to come to Lamoni. You are both brilliant and you're gifted, and we've all been blessed by what you have to share. So thank you both. Don't forget to fill out your cards and leave them for Jim.